Minister of Finance and Development Planning, members of the National Legislature, distinguished members of Cabinet and other officials of government present, the heads and representatives of various universities and members of the academic community, chairperson of political parties, members of the Liberia Economic Association, members of the private sector, members of the Liberia Chamber of Commerce, members of the Liberia Business Association, Limpac, members of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We are the Liberia Macroeconomic Policy Analysis Center, Limpac, are very pleased to welcome all of you to this unique occasion, the first edition of the Limpac Policy Forum under the theme Identifying Short, Medium, and Long-Term Strategies to Support Economic Diversification, Growth, and Stability. As a specialized unit within the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning, charged with the responsibility of conducting and supporting policy research, including macroeconomic analysis, we are honored by your presence, especially knowing how each of you have contributed and still contributing to improving the public policy environment in Liberia through various impactful initiatives, including soliciting and exchanging ideas on key issues to help support the design and efficient implementation of public policy to achieve tangible pro benefits in sustainable ways across Liberia. In addition to providing capacity building for central government employees in data and statistical analysis, organizing these fora will be one of Limpac's strategies of supporting the global agenda for prosperity and development of the government of Liberia under the stewardship of His Excellency President George Manet Weah. Honorable Minister, distinguished official of government, and our distinguished guests, today's forum is divided into two main sessions. The first session will focus on the presentation of the consultant on the findings and recommendations of the study, which is entitled Assessing the Economic Impact of the Draw-down of UNMIL on the Liberian Economy. The second segment of the forum will entertain a panel discussion from knowledgeable practitioners who with us and the participants will discuss strategy for diversification, the key recommendation of the report of the consultant, which is intended to counter the negative impact of UNMIL drawdown in addition to existing structural weaknesses of the Liberian economy. As we are happy for the success of this forum, we are equally very grateful to the African Capacity Building Foundation, the ACBF, for the financial and technical support they have provided to Limpac under the Quick Win project of 2017. Trade forecasting and training lab, and funding 3 research studies, 2 of which have been completed and validated, including the assessment of the impact of UNMIL drawdown. Similarly, the training lab, which was completed 5 months ago, is now serving as the training center of Limpac capacity building for central government employees especially employees of the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning. As Limpac is thankful to the ACBF, Limpac also looks forward to support and collaboration from other partners, especially within the field of policy research and macroeconomic analysis. Limpac is also grateful to the government of Liberia through the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning for the financial support to our team. Special thanks to Minister Samuel D. Tour Jr. and the senior management team of the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning for not only giving us financial support, but also pushing the Limpac team to achieve more. In similar fashion, we also want to thank Honorable Boyman S. Kamara, former Minister of Finance and Development Planning, who regained at the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning initiated a revitalization of Limpac by robustly reconnecting with the African Capacity Building Foundation. On behalf of Limpac Board of Management, let me once again welcome everyone. We look forward to your participation and contributions. God bless us all and save Liberia. Thank you.
Minister of Finance and Development Planning, who will now officially be remarked.
Distinguished cabinet ministers, our development partners, members of the business community, Liberia Chamber of Commerce, Liberia Business Association, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank the Limpac Director for extending me this invitation on what I think is an extremely important undertaking. Limpac is emerging as a serious critical think tank, not just at the Ministry of Finance, but within the broader macroeconomic space in the country. I got in touch with Limpac when I used to be a consultant at the Ministry of Planning and Economic Affairs. Then I think Depu Zuo used to be managing Limpac. Was it Depu? Or I think it was Depu. But Limpac has quite evolved since then. So I'm quite amazed at the intellectual forays that I see Limpac wading into. And today's topic is even more relevant. There is no better topic that you could have chosen than today. Given the circumstances of the time and the fundamental structure of our economy. And so I really hope that the panel can do due justice to the depth of analysis that is needed, shed light on data, to provide a broad limelight on the evolution of our economy over the last 6 or more years. So this will be good. So Limpac, as a capacity building entity, as a research entity, I think it needs to be supported. And I think that the African Capacity Building Foundation, and I encourage other partners as well to support Limpac in this direction. This is important also in the sense that the key challenge countries face, including our country, Liberia, within the government space, finance infrastructure investment, finance other kinds of projects, so that real economic and social rates of return can be high, and that the private sector can take off. In a context where the private sector doesn't take off after debt accumulation, that country faces a crisis. Because it faces the choice again of going another round of borrowing or fixing a weak private sector, which takes time. So the question that gets is that, how do we get into a situation where we deliver a project and the project doesn't have an impact on the private sector for growth to happen? That's a serious question that we in government have to grapple with. So it means that the quality of project design, and this goes to all of our development partners here, and the key ministries that are in this executive, the quality of delivery. So I asked Dr. King, I'm saying, you know, we can envision new direction, we can write new development plans. The real challenge is how we deliver those plans. That's gas sustainability implications. And he said, well, you're right, because the science of, there's no easy answers to how we deliver. The challenge is that governments will have to come up with a framework and maybe use transparency better. So how do we deliver in education, for example? We need to use data to ensure that teachers are in school at the time they're supposed to be in school. Who's monitoring a teacher in Bukonjide, in Sakipie, in some village where the teacher is supposed to be at 10 o'clock? Who is ensuring that he's there? How do we use data to expose that that teacher is not there, and then the teacher knows the spotlight is on him, so he's supposed to be there? So his challenge to governments is that we need to use information more transparently so that we deliver better. And so Limpac will have to be in these kinds of contexts where you're informing the science of delivering through your research. Major challenge that we face in the country, and we need to do better at that. So the topic at hand about the diversification of our economy is the central question we face in Liberia, and most countries are facing all of it. The last 40, 50, 60 years after World War II, most economies in the country are dependent on raw material exports. Iron ore in our case, rubber, we just sell raw materials. And so when commodity prices collapse, and 200 years of economic history show that commodity prices will always collapse. It's the law of commodity price. It will go down. And so when it goes down, countries face the massive economic headwinds, they lose revenue. Then after 3 or 5 years, the cycle resumes again, it goes up, and then the bad, we'll forget about the bad memories. And so this is how developing countries in Africa have attended. Price collapse, withdrawal. 405, that's a huge critical. So that leads to a situation of overvaluation of Liberian dollars. So because the stock of US dollar is diminishing, while the stock of Liberian dollar is staying the same. Now, if you have 100 US dollars competing with 10,000 Liberian dollars and 8,000 Liberian dollars disappear, you're left with 2,000, let's say 50 US dollars, you're left with 50 US dollars and 10,000 Liberian dollars. So as the foreign exchange, the United dollar disappears, Liberian dollar is staying there. So the ratio of Liberian dollars to US dollar is getting larger. So this is an example of an overvalued currency. So the natural tendency is for the Liberian dollar to depreciate because importers who demand United States dollar will continue to put pressure to get the United States dollar. So this is what the government has been responding to in the past 4 months. So there was a precipitous climb in that foreign exchange situation, net to around $163 to 1. Yield being with direct market exercise announced the president, we brought that down to 163 to about 150, inching up gradually. EFT is convening, and take a look at the battery of measures we're using. But these are all short-term fixes. Let's get it clear. There's no long-term solution. There's no long-term solution for this problem. There's no quick fix. There's no magic wand. Okay? We're looking at trade finance instruments. We have instruments that are really demanding the United States dollars. We're looking at the serialization and you know. And so all of these instruments will help to stabilize the situation over the long term. The ultimate solution the IMF is offering is we have to allow the economy to go to a new fundamental. So he said we had a false economy in the past 6 years. The IMF would say that. Rubber, I see the rubber people here, and then we have a lot of meetings. They're exporting, basically water, and so their price is not competitive. They're running, negative balance sheets, and they can't pay their workers, and so we have to help them so that we can get them to a competitive level where they're able to export less impurity, add value to the product, and get more foreign exchange. This is the broad direction. To do that will require some time. It can't happen in 1 month, right? So adding value to oil palm, the whole agriculture situation there, where we didn't have land challenge, the planters don't have access to their land. So we're in a country that is in need of turning the situation around. And meantime, all of the investments we made in agriculture in the last 12 years, you heard numbers around 16 billion, not paying out. One of the reasons not paying out is because we're not giving Sami Davi the land for them to plant. Why we're not giving Sami Davi the land? Because our people have the land. So it's a no-brainer. You want to grow the economy, you have an investor who has in his concession contracts X, quantity of land, and he can access the quantity because of the land challenge. So at what time he begins to plan, then it takes around how many years? 5 years, 6 years. So if you give somebody that in the land 2 years from today, you have to start counting the next 5 years from that 2 years before you see the kind of growth. So this is a serious challenge. And so people who expect a magic wand to wave, when you have investors in the last 10 years and those investments have not materialized because of self-imposed constraints. Now we can talk about Ebola. Let's say Ebola is a natural thing that hurt us. The land dispute is not a natural disaster. Please, people. Ebola is a natural thing that we didn't have control over. The real turnaround in this country is the way we're going. The president has committed and he's launching the program for identical prosperity and development in the next, the next week or so, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. In Ghana, the president will be launching the plan. The plan is ready. This plan has been delivered probably in the shortest time in the history of this country. The government came to office February 22nd. Was that January 22nd? And it's now completed the plan about a month ago, or 2 months ago. It's been peer reviewed. This is the shortest delivery time. Even Bob Ghana didn't deliver a plan in that short time span. So it's a revolutionary accomplishment of the president. All partners are now seeing the plan. They like it. They see the broad direction, the effective prioritization of the plan. They all agree that road investment in this country is critical for our transformation. And we see the situation that's happening in the southeast where places cut up, price of rice is rising, price of basic commodity. And that's a natural thing. This thing has been happening in the last 12 years. Again, we know that. In the last 12 years, we've had that situation. We never resolved it. The president is committed to resolving it in the next 6 years so that we don't face this problem. So road investment is key. Human capital development is also key. We have a situation where 30,000 of our students go to the exam, and only 2 persons can pass mathematics and English. This is a tragedy of humongous proportion. It means, what future do we have? Even today, if you go through some kind of manner here, and for some reason, make Microsoft and all these companies to come here, they're going to ask, where are the people going to do all the programs around the world? Where's the human capacity? And we say, no, we don't have them. We go for the Nigerians, the Chinese, and the Indians. Please just stay there. That's what's going to happen. Because you essentially have a school system that's not together students who can read at level, students who can do basic mathematics, who go and do science and technology. You don't have that. You have medical doctors who are challenged. It's a very serious situation we face in the country. A friend of mine who called his name said he broke his leg here, went to a hospital, and the doctor looked at him and said, oh, it's okay, just take penicillin and go, you'll be okay. And after 3 days, his name got worried, having to play with America, and he gave the same X-ray that the doctor used to the doctor in America, and everything. But this is broken. This is broken. How did that thing like never see it? That's a challenge, a huge development challenge. How do you solve that challenge? You find resources to make more sustained investment in medical science, in training, sending doctors, and this president just did that. He sent 10 or 15 doctors out with the legal resources. This is the way we turn the country around, people. There's no magic. Important. Even as we face macroeconomic headwinds, the global situation is also melting down. Interest rates are rising in the United States. Middle-income countries, emerging economies that have huge stockpile of bonds that are denominated in Liberia are going to face crisis very soon. The challenge we face is that if the global recession is coming, it will impact us if we do not move very fast. So, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Turkey, all countries are facing. Sierra Leone, this is not unique to Liberia. The uniqueness is that we had an Ebola shock. That's our uniqueness. And we had an UNMIL withdrawal. So we've been dependent. So we need to find a way to replace those 2 forces pretty fast through new investment and new injections in the economy. So I hope the panel will be able to deal with some creative instruments that we can look at. Local currency, bond market, we have the Vice President for our Treasury at the IFC coming here so we can talk about moving towards a cashless economy very soon. In a dual currency regime, if people start transacting with mobile money more, you reduce the pressure on the exchange rate. So we need some thinking on how do we move towards local currency bond development? How do we use the Liberian dollar as a financing instrument in this economy? We need to think about those innovations. And in the technical meeting, I am aware that the CBL and the president of the LPI was telling me have made some gains in that. We need to put all of those gains, so we'll be working towards a technical workshop and seeing how do we accelerate the path towards, a cashless economy, because this is going to eliminate the exchange rate pressure effectively. People go to the store and use their mobile money, mobile technology to transact. I think we need to move fast. There's some gains we've made. And so I hope you can shed light on all of these. For the short term, we're working with AFDP, the World Bank, and some of our partners to move on SEC in Buchanan. Let's take the Buchanan situation. We basically invested in Buchanan Road. It's almost like a road to nowhere. Now, we are paying the debt for the road into Buchanan. But when you're driving on that road, you're driving alone. The indication of economic progress is the traffic on a road. So you put a Buchanan Road there, you get on the road, you're basically alone. So that means that we don't have a lot of traction going in Buchanan. We need to locate an SEC there. We have a port there. So in other words, what we're going to do forward is we're not going to build a road to nowhere anymore. Because building a road to nowhere cannot change the economy. When you build a road, you need to surround that road with what the President of the African Development calls stable processing zone. And I know we're going to work on that very soon. So in other words, an economic growth corridor that has a mini hydro, that got value chains in agriculture, that have other things that can attract traffic to the road so that the rate of return of the investment on the road can pan out. This is what we've not done. We're learning the lessons from the last 12 years. The next loans we're taking, the next investments in infrastructure we're making will materialize in the outer years so that the country can continue on this work. So I wish the panelists well. I hope you can challenge them with new insights and perspectives on how we move fast on diversifying our economy, how we build a resilient private sector. It's not just building a private sector. You build a resilient private sector that can withstand shocks, because shocks will happen in the world. I don't care what, life is about shock. It's about accidents. It's about things. Earthquake will happen in Indonesia. A price will collapse. We have no indication right now that iron ore price will ever resume to the level they were in 10 years ago. It's now $65 per dry metric ton. The indication is that that's a new normal. It will go as far as maybe 75, but it will never go beyond that. So we have to learn to live within that means. But who is to say that another shock won't take it down to 30? Nobody can guarantee that. So you need to move away from reliance on iron ore. Iron ore can be your business model. You need to use whatever iron ore resources you have now to diversify the economy, to service the economy, to build technology. Leapfrog using technology like Rwanda is doing. Other countries that are less fortunate in terms of the resources are making that leap. Do we have the capacity in the private sector to move on? Is the government supporting investments in business incubation, in human capital development, to move the country to identify this new structure, this diversified, what is the pro plan bringing to the table? I hope the panelists will be able to do justice to all of that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We have now come to the end of part one of this program.
I published 2 papers in an international journal, Openness in Africa, Final Data Studies, and the second one is the impact of internet on export performance. Back to our agenda. For now, we have a keynote presentation assessing the empirical economic impact of the UNMIL drawdown on the Liberian economy. And this will be done by Mr. Samuel W. Thompson, the presenter. He is the Managing Partner Agency for Economic Development and Empowerment. And he was the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Liberia. Please welcome Mr. Samuel W. Thompson.
Good morning. I would just start by saying all protocols observed as we get to the business at hand. I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to Limpac for giving me this opportunity to look into, as the Minister of Finance said, a very pressing topic, assessing the economic impact of the UNMIL withdrawal from Liberia. The methodology, we looked at causes and economic consequences of civil war. We looked at the local impact of UN mission spending in 9 countries. There are several studies that have been done, either sponsored by the UN Peace Dividend Trust and other academic centers, and also the IMF on conflict and vulnerability, unintended consequences, and economic development impacts. We looked at government of Liberia and IMF reports. We looked at UNDP and UNCTAD analysis on vulnerability, which is the key issue that we are looking at in Liberia today. We looked at the Liberia Agricultural Transformation Agenda sources, people like the African Governance Initiative, Golden Beryllium, the Overseas Development Institute, and we had one key informant interview with the UNMIL Director of Mission Support. We did data calculation and analysis, looking at the UN budget performance reports, the UNMIL budget for 2017-2018, looking at the entire 16-year period. We did not focus too much on the econometrics, but mainly looking at this, the budget data and different desk reviews, evaluating common patterns in UN peacekeeping missions around the world as a way of developing and analyzing the data with respect to Liberia. This is a summary of our research findings. We gathered that UNMIL spent $7.5 billion over a 16-year period, of which 90% was spent offshore. More than 90% was spent offshore, and this is a pattern that has been observed in several peacekeeping missions around the world, UN peacekeeping missions. Most of that money goes to the troop contributing countries. International civilian staff salaries are paid in their home countries, and the UN does general procurement on behalf of the missions out of New York to different vendors of whether arms, whether ammunition, whatever they need, troop uniforms, transport, etc., etc. So basically, from looking at the data, we focused first of all on the local impact of UNMIL budget. We determined that UNMIL spent a total of $551 million US up to June 2018, or basically 7.4% of that massive figure, 7.5 billion figure that you see up here. We also looked at the local impact of that expenditure on GDP using a 1.5 multiplier, GDP multiplier, which was determined in these UN studies that I talked about. There's a study done by Dutch and Carnahan for the US Peace Dividend Trust, in which they assess that the multiplier effect of those local expenditures on the gross domestic product of Liberia at 1.5 would be basically $827.7 million, less than $1 billion, average 55.2, and you can see here that at the beginning of the mission, when it really mattered a lot, the share of the local impact on gross domestic product was quite high, because if you can remember, the peacetime economy of Liberia, the post-war economy of Liberia was very small, the tax base was very small, economic activity had not really picked up, and so it really made a difference. And out of the spending of these allowances, we see here that 40 to 60% of that contributed to the local impact. MSA is in blue here, and even that began to decline in relative terms as we progress. You can see that local procurement was the smallest due to the way the economy is structured. Local staff, local UN staff, Liberians, this is their spending. It took on a higher percentage. But because of the structure of the Liberian economy, due to high foreign-owned businesses and a high import dependence, one of the aspects of vulnerability that this study looked at, the local procurement was not very high. And this is the summary of the impact. We thought that it's important before, if you want to talk about the impact of UNMIL departing, it's important to talk about what impact they had during their presence. And so this is a summary. When you remember that GDP chart, there was a kickstart. When the economy was very vulnerable and very small, UNMIL really made a difference. At 11.2% of gross domestic product around 2003, 2004, and in subsequent years, it helped to stimulate the economy. That spending of MSA on rent income, there was if you can recall, there was a huge force on the ground and they had to find places to stay. So in response to that demand, the local supply response to that demand for housing, it led to a renovation of damaged buildings by homeowners and construction of new apartments and so forth, to meet that demand. So that was a positive thing. Investments in hotels, even this hotel that we are in, there are several tourism infrastructure that responded to the UNMIL presence. And in so doing, developed a tourism infrastructure that can now service other visitors in the country. We talked about the spending by UNMIL national staff. We talked about employment and capacity building for UNMIL staff and service industries, restaurants, teaching their people customer service, cooks, and different industries, carpenters taking on building trades to be able to work in different UNMIL places, garages, and so forth. And then the different government offices, private sector entities, NGOs, to work in UNMIL. Some people, some very qualified people became drivers, because the salaries were quite interesting compared to what they were getting. But that created inflationary pressure on wages such that in order for government to keep qualified people, they had to increase salaries in certain offices, but on the overall, it created a social problem, a social political problem. You had accusations of a few people making a lot of money, but the government was forced to do some of these things to be able to attract and retain qualified people. Then we had a tax loss because the Status of Forces Agreement of UNMIL exempts local staff from paying taxes and duties, and even some of the foreign staff on imports of and usage of different goods to the country. And so that had an impact because the tax avoidance on UNMIL expenditures and on-mill businesses, it created, other people say, but if they're not paying taxes, why should we pay taxes? And so that had an impact. Other positive impacts, I already talked about. Unfair competition from tax and duty exempt. Some international consultants and contractors came in and they in bidding scenarios, they had duty-free or tax-free, and so there was an uneven competition in certain areas. Duty-free goods leaked out of the on-mill commissaries to the local markets, so it created another problem there. The job losses by on-mill staff as on-mill has left. You have the sex trade, drugs, exploitation, trafficking, AIDS, infections, and other things that accompany large presence of troops in the country. We looked at foreign exchange inflows and Liberian dollar exchange rates to see whether there was any correlation. I did not do a regression analysis, as one of my able mentioned, to give you the beta coefficients, but you can see that anecdotally, part of for a significant part of the presence, the correlation was not so very clear. You can see the on-mill, the change in on-mill FX inflows from the original, the initial blips, very high blip, and then as the mission began to stabilize, the foreign exchange rate, the Liberian dollar exchange rate, was not really closely correlated. The average on-mill inflows were in the range of 35 to 45 billion, and sharply declining as the mission declined. So we talked about that. Now, the official analysis, we discovered that there were some lapses in the official analysis, because when you go beyond the initial years of on-mill presence, and you look at the impact, the real impact of on-mill, creating peaceful conditions for major businesses to come into the country and invest. The literature tends to talk about a high impact of on-mill, but as we can see from the declining gross expenditure as a percentage of GDP, let me just go back to this. That narrative was, I think, a bit off, because by July 2018, from our calculations, the impact of on-mill spending on gross domestic product is less than 2%. So we have to take that into account as we look at the other factors, and we will see from the research. We saw from the research that excuse me, I'm having some technical difficulties here. That despite some correlation, the on-mill inflows were very low in size versus the size of the balance of payments. On-mill average inflows were somewhere in the range of $34 million. If you take the last few years, you'll see the trend. Compared to the gross on-mill annual expenditures, you see there have been some errors in the analysis, and because they took the gross expenditures, i.e. payments to troop contributing countries, payments of salaries of international staff offshore, and in some analysis, including the IMF, and they said that with this withdrawal, it's going to have a major impact. But if you look at the size of the net inflows into Liberia, the local spending, and the GDP multiplier effect of those spendings, as a percentage of gross FX reserves of the country is less than 5%. And as a percentage of on-bill FX, okay, one of them is net and one is gross. Okay, but you can see that there are other things that are much more, other variables that are much more significant. This is an IMF analysis which showed that it tried to take the gross, in red. This is the gross. So we discovered that was in error. In terms of inflation, the 12.4% inflation in 2017, and due to LD dollar depreciation, high world oil prices, and tax policy on petroleum products, those are much more significant factors than the declining figures that I talked about, and the $34.5 million average annual inflows on your spending. Especially food and fuel costs. Food and fuel costs combined are in the order of $600 million US as part of the trade balance. I forgot to mention from the previous slide that the balance of payment statistics, the trade balance is in excess of $1 billion deficit. Okay, and the current account balance is even higher than that. So the on-bill expenditures, especially in the latter part of the deployment period, as the legal economy grew, as major foreign direct investments came into the economy, as I've mentioned before. The greatest impact of on-bill's presence in Liberia is the third bullet point, i.e. unhindered economic activity in the peacetime economy and GDP growth during 15 to 16 years of peace. Job losses, less than 1,000 on-bill and local staff, multiplied by a family size of 7, 5,300 people. Service contracts, of course, the usual garbage collection and other things that the mission presence and even the residential presence, and then job losses in on-bill related service industries. We talked about the creation of the glut in high-end residential and office space segments, excess supply of office space, especially with the UN agencies consolidating out of Mamba Point and other places into the one UN arrangement in the Pan-African Plaza. Lower tax revenues from service sectors catering to on-bill. But as far as fiscal policy, no incremental income tax losses on national staff because salaries were tax-free during the entire period based, especially due to the status of forces agreement. We talked about pressure on government to increase spending on security. Okay, as far as fiscal policy, there's more pressure to increase security sector and civil administration nationwide. If you remember, on-bill filled that gap, especially during the earlier years of the deployment. They had civilian affairs and all these kinds of officers helping the government to re-establish authority and legitimacy across the country. Very insignificant revenue losses, as we mentioned before. Most importantly, as we looked at the literature and as we studied the numbers, the official analysis from the government, from the IMF and other analysts, it came down to the question of how fragile is the Liberian economy? What caused the war? What led to a debilitating civil war in which citizens of this country destroyed over 90% of the infrastructure? It comes down to fragility. And what do we mean by that? Liberia post-UNMIL is still a fragile state, a state that is heavily dependent after 7 decades of very low export volumes of only 2 primary commodities without any value-added processing. The destination countries of iron ore and rubber, they process these commodities into higher price and more stable finished goods. These 2 commodities, if you look at the balance of payment statistics, iron ore and rubber, they constitute less than 20% of the trade deficit. In other words, iron ore and rubber exports can only cover 20% of our import needs, our import requirements. So we have huge trade deficits, more than 60% of GDP, which implies that most of what we consume, a significant part of what we consume in terms of food, in terms of fuel, in terms of, you name it, is important, requiring foreign exchange that has to be generated somehow. And in the generation of that foreign exchange, we see that we have a high current account deficit to GDP excluding grants, and this implies a low savings rate. The economy is not generating profits. Businesses, Liberian-owned businesses, not generating profits. We do not have a tax base that is of empowered citizens who are saving from what they make. So as a result, we depend more on grants and high grant element funding to cover imports, debt service, and other factor payments. That ratio of current account deficit to GDP is one of the key balance of payment analysis factors that indicate a high pressure to depreciate the real effective exchange rate of the Liberian dollar. A weak current account deficit means that the economy is highly vulnerable. And these are the things that we saw as we looked at UNMIL flows relative to the balance of payments. And this led us into looking more at the factors of fragility. What causes fragility and vulnerability? You can see here the current account balance, including grants, for the 1%. But when you remove grants, it's a deficit of 95%. In other words, trade in goods, trade deficit to GDP 62%. We use 2015 as the most reliable because in the BOP statistics, the further out you go, you are getting more into estimates and projections. This we think is the closest. And then you have only 3.4 months of export cover. You see? So then we look at the rubber exports as a percentage of the trade balance, 4.8%. Gold and diamond and palm sector can produce 160,000 potential jobs in the value chain. If we can solve the problem with the concession with the land use, if we can solve the land use problem in Liberia, the African Growth Initiative, the Tony Blair Foundation, estimates that oil palm, if we can just increase the acreage from 40,000 acres or hectares of oil palm planted, if we can resolve the land tenure issues, the concession framework for Sam Darby and these other companies, and increase acreage to 185,000 hectares from the current 40. The oil palm industry, if only 25% of concession acreage is developed, oil palm will take over from iron ore. I'd like to repeat myself. If we can resolve the land use, land rights, concession allocation, and incentives framework so that oil palm companies and individual Liberian landowners can increase the acreage of palm oil plantations in Liberia to 185 to 200,000 hectares against the total more than 800,000 hectares that have been granted as areas of interest. Palm oil exports will take over from iron ore exports. In summary, we already provided summary data on the impact of UNMIL withdrawal. We said that the impacts of the GDP impacts are quite minimal, towards post UNMIL, because the gross domestic product and the balance of payments have increased, albeit the BOP is in huge deficit. But most importantly, as UNMIL leaves, how do we drastically reduce vulnerability and avoid future crises? I think that is what I was led to think about as I looked at the numbers of the impact and so forth. And basically, what is already underway, comprehensive and equitable land reform. I got to stand closer to this device. And then we have to focus on agriculture and value-added production through an intelligent and politically sensitive commodity strategy. Short-cycle crops like oil palm, rice, cassava, and cocoa, where we have the comparative advantage. What do I mean by intelligent and politically sensitive? We have to be intelligent like the Malaysians and the Indonesians, and look at versatile the commodities are. 1. 2, we have to look at how deeply integrated these commodities are in the production fabric of the powerful destination countries. I would like to suggest to you that we could avoid a potential trade war, or it would not even be a war. You know, it would not even be a war if we say that we want to reverse the export of raw rubber to the United States, where Akron, Ohio, and places in Tennessee are using these products to create jobs and economic opportunity for their citizens. These things this is the reality of the global market economy. When you see Mr. Trump talking about America first. So an intelligent commodity strategy must look at commodities that can achieve job creation and growth and reduce political conflict, reduce global geopolitical conflict. And one of the reasons why oil palm is good, because we do not have such a potential conflict with Indonesia and Malaysia. They are already at our doorsteps trying to see how we can increase oil palm production acreage. I'll put down the mic. Can you hear me in the back? No. All the way back there? Okay. I'm having technical problems, distracting. You see? So palm oil is one of the paths of least resistance. Okay? Iron ore is a similar thing. You know? Stockholm, Europe, the whole industrial fabric of the global economy is geared towards Liberia exporting primary commodities. How do we break fragility? How do we reduce our vulnerability? We intelligently select commodities that do not pose such an issue. and we have to get involved in value-added production. It is environmentally sustainable, much more environmentally sustainable. These areas have been degraded through slash and burn farming, in line with population growth, population and urban development. You know, these places have been used to feed the population centers of Kakata, Banga, Ganta, etc. over several decades of our history. They are now degraded. The carbon potential can be improved by planting oil palm. And the World Bank and the African Development Bank, if we can have an inclusive investment framework where the pro-poor agenda is trying to achieve now, where if I have land in my community, I can find myself generating $2,000 per hectare per annum. You know, I mean, that is a win-win proposition. And if we can resolve the land grabs, investment framework, and have a more environmentally sustainable agricultural policy, we will exceed the 200,000 hectares in less than 3 years. These people have been stuck in a rut.
We will take one more question from the audience.
Yeah. I don't know if I should stay. Thank you, Larry.
Good afternoon. All right. This year's policy forum is the first edition of the Liberia Macroeconomic Policy and Analysis Center, Limpac, of the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning. The center is a think tank policy group with within a specialized department at the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning, providing technical support and capacity building across government ministry and agencies. This meeting policy forum brings professionals around the table from different sectors of the Liberian economy with huge experience in research and development, business and economic development, agricultural policy, oil and gas management, governance and the rule of law, among others. Since, in fact, our consultant report strongly recommends on restructuring the Liberian economy with major focus on agriculture by adding value to some major commodities and at the same time creating public-private partnership in order to finance our infrastructure. It is incumbent upon this and many other reasons that the 2018 event features panel discussion focusing on identifying short, medium, and long-term strategies for economic diversification, growth, and stability in Liberia. With different backgrounds of our panelists, it is our expectation that our informed discussions will provide additional policy prescriptions and options as well as highlighting key strategies and framework within which policymakers could make informed and appropriate decisions on how government can solve some of these structural problems affecting the economy, while taking into consideration due account of the potential risks. Following the panel discussion, a breakout section of table discussions will be conducted by our secretariat, which will give the audience an opportunity to review major talking points from our panelists, and at the same time, propose solutions for restructuring the Liberian economy in a form of presentation to their group heads. Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepared to go to, I want informed panelists to have these discussions. It's my honor to again call on the Master of Ceremony to continue the program. So these are the structure of our discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dory. For now, we will have the setting of the panel.
Our first name here is Mr. Development Planning. He has 15 years of private sector experience, focusing on business development and support services, including business consulting, training designs, and institutional management. He comes to the forum with a strong background in business development, financial management, grant and project management, economic development, public policy, and community development. He holds an MBA in finance with emphasis in investment with several certificates. Honorable Probo, you are welcome on stage. Our next panelist is Anthony Cole-Dory, who worked with the Ministry of Justice for over 6 years now, and previously served as Assistant Minister and Legal Advisor, assisting in the drafting of several laws and regulations intended to improve economic governance in Liberia. Anthony Cole-Dory is the Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Justice, where her department is responsible for advising the government of Liberia on economic matters, including commercial transactions to which Liberia is a party. Anthony Cole-Dory, you're welcome to stage. We now invite on stage Mr. Stanley Kamara, National Economist of the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, who's former Assistant County Director of the UNDP. He's a development economist and former Assistant Minister for Macroeconomic Analysis and Policy at the defunct Ministry of Planning and Economic Affairs. Mr. Kamara, you're highly welcome on stage. We now call on stage the Vice President for Technical Services National Oil Company of Liberia, Local. He holds a doctorate degree in economics from Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria. He has intricate understanding of the relations between fiscal and monetary policies, both in dynamic stochastic general equilibrium and vector auto-regression models. Two basic tools that should be in the toolkit of every modern economist. He is a macroeconomist with African bias. He has published several articles on the topic. He has given his expert opinion in some of the local dailies. He is a professor at the University of Liberia Graduate School. Mr. Lester Tenney, you are highly invited to speak. Our next panelist is Mr. Francis A. Dennis Jr. He has over 36 years of working experience at LBDR, Liberia Bank for Development and Investment. During his time at the LBDR, Mr. Dennis served 19 years in executive management position, of which 14 years were spent as president or CEO and 5 years as general manager, corporate secretary. He is an expert in project financing and rehabilitation, with undergraduate and graduate degrees, postgraduate diplomas, and international seminars and meetings. Additionally, he served on several boards of directors of public corporations, non-for-profit organizations, and business entities. Mr. Dennis also served as president of the Liberia Bankers Association for 2 terms. Currently serving on the board of directors of several leading companies, president of the Liberia Chamber of Commerce 2013-2014, financial consultant, advisor to some well-established companies, and lecturer in banking and finance at the Liberia Institute of Public Administration. Mr. Francis A. Dennis Jr., you're invited. Our final panelist is the coordinator and head of the project implementation unit at the Liberian Ministry of Justice. Mr. Davis is an economist, a project management expert, and banker. He is a Liberian and a holder of several academic and professional credentials. He is well schooled in economics, development management, international finance, banking, project management, and international cooperation. Mr. James Francis Davis holds a master's degree in international cooperation from Almeria, Spain, a Master of Science degree in Applied Labor Economics from the University of Toronto, Italy, an Executive Master in Applied Economics from the Institut des Sciences Po, Paris, France, a Master of Arts degree in International Development Practice from the University of Limerick, Ireland, a Master of Science degree in International Banking and Finance from Manchester University, United Kingdom, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Economics Business Research from Zurich, Switzerland. He is a Certified International Project Manager, CRPM, a Project Management Personnel, PMP, a Chapter Economist, CHE, and an Accredited Financial Analyst, AFA. Mr. James Francis Davis is currently a nominee. Mr. James Francis Davis is currently a nominee for the award of a honorary doctorate degree in management from London, United Kingdom, and a candidate for the Doctor of Philosophy degree in International Development Practice at the University of Limerick, Ireland, and a Doctor of Business Administration with emphasis in Financial Sector Development, and MBS, Zurich, Switzerland. He is a fellow and member of the American Academy of Project Management and member of the Project Management Institute, Philadelphia, USA. He delivers lectures on a wide range of issues across economic development, finance, project management, and international cooperation. He lectures at the University of Hague. He lectures applied sciences at the University of Hague and Liberia Economic College and London Graduate School. Mr. James Francis Davis has worked both in the private and public sector. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. James Francis Davis. Conversation, so answers to the questions and rebuttal, if necessary, to the views of other panelists.
Now, how many of you in the audience actually
support the diversification
thesis coming out of the
report? Please make it known by raising your hand. So, how many of you want us to go home and sing Kumbaya around the fire heart and leading the economy to get self-function? So no one wants that, right? Exactly. Now let's go to business.
The report
on the UNMIL drawdown is interesting as it tries to quantify the impacts of the UNMIL drawdown on the economy, as well as the overall peace and security of the nation. With all the insights gathered from the report, there's still lingering concern in the minds of the audience, but there are some key takeaways from the report, such as challenges facing the Liberian economy, low occupancy rate of real estate, loss in revenue from services and recreation. This finding from the report is further compounded by symptoms of existing structural challenges that are manifested normally through exchange rate inflation deteriorating current account balances. Clearly, these impacts in some ways do not bring a merry portrait of the economy going through time. In 5 minutes, what are individual views on the findings and recommendations of the report with regards to the theme of the report, diversification? Beginning with you, Mr. Francis Wreh.